So I have the privilege of coaching a couple crossover soccer teams, and it's a blast. It's a ton of fun, and eventually we'll actually play a game. It's been a lot of rain for the weekends, but I coach two age groups. One is 4th and 5th grade. The other one is kindergarten and 1st grade, and I love coaching both of them. I like coaching the soccer part of the 4th and 5th grade team, and then I like herding the cats that I do in the kindergarten and 1st grade team. But it's fun. It's just a blast to be out there. But when it comes to games, what's great about all kids of all ages, but particularly the younger age, is that when they get dropped off by their parents or they get brought there, they come out to the field and they come to me, and then I set the starters out on the field, and one of the first things the kids do is they scan the crowd to try to find their family, try to find their mom and dad. They want to find somebody, or a grandfather, somebody who is there to watch them, and they can't wait to find them. They find this person. It's just amazing. If they do something well, they want to find that person. Did you see what I just did? Did you see it? Did you see what I did? Celebrate me, praise me, let's get some Kona ice after the game. And then there are times when that child gets hurt on the soccer field. I tell our parents all the time, please do not come out on the field. Do not. Like, if you see a femur sticking out, come on out. That's fine. We can do that. But if it's a scrape or they just got kicked by somebody, I will handle it. Because the moment you come out there, all bets are off at that point. Like, it's loud, there's wailing and gnashing of teeth, and we can't ever bring them back into the fold. But what they want to do is they just want to see who's in the crowd. They want to see that their family is there to come and to watch them. Now, as you get older, right, that changes a bit. You get into like middle school, like, hey, is my girlfriend there? Because I want to see, she's got to see how cool I am out here in my soccer stuff. And so that changes that. And then you get older, like into high school. And now you're looking for scouts, right? You want scouts to be there. And if any of you are crossover coaches, please understand, there are 0 scouts, so you're fine. It's not that big of a deal. But you start looking for scouts to watch you, and then the college is kind of the same thing. But at some point in high school and college, you've got alumni that come back to watch. And there's a few of them that you've heard their stories, right? You've heard about these players who have gone on before. They've gone on to play professional sports. And when you hear they're coming to watch the game, that's who you're scanning the crowd to kind of find out who's there. It transitions and moves, but there's always somebody that you're looking for as an athlete to be in the stands to watch you. As we read through this morning, I want us to keep some of that idea in mind, because the way that Jesus is going to lead us into being who he's called us to be is to remind us that the stands are full. There are people, alumni, who have gone on before, and they've come to watch. They've come to see what's happened. So let's pick up again here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 11. We'll walk through these 3 verses. We're going to look at some words. It's sobering how Jesus ends these Beatitudes. He's moved into persecution. So here's verse 11 again. Blessed are you. Remember, happy, rejoice, congratulations to you when others revile and persecute you. Now, we don't use the word revile a lot. Someone to help us, give us a definition. Here's the definition of revile. Revile means to scold or to rebuke. In the Greek, it literally means to cast in your teeth, to throw in your teeth. The phrase that we use is to throw it back in your face. That's what it means to revile. To revile someone is to rebuke them with their own words, to throw it back in their face. Blessed are you, congratulations to you, not to people, to you, when others revile you, when they throw it back in your face, when they cast it in your teeth, when they rebuke you with your own words, and when they persecute you. This word, again, means to chase or harass or to drive out. So Jesus pairs these two together. Blessed are you when your theology is thrown back at you. Blessed are you when the things that you say are thrown back in your face. Blessed are you. Blessed are you when that then turns into being driven out. Driven out of your workplace, driven out of the marketplace, driven out of the school system, when you've been driven out. Blessed are you. Rejoice. Congratulations to you. And then he continues. He says, though, when they utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Not blessed are you when people throw it back in your face that you've been a real jerk to them. Not that. Not blessed are you when you've become an extremist. Not that. Blessed are you when they do these things on my account. Verse 10 is, blessed are you when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Verse 11 is, when you do it in my name, simply because you're one of mine. This has nothing to do with behavior. This has everything to do with identifying with Jesus. Blessed are you when you are mocked and your words are thrown back at you, when you're driven out because you call yourself a Christian. But it's this third attack that Jesus lists that really helps to put things in perspective for us. So back in verse 11, blessed are you, congratulations, happy when others revile, when they mock, when they throw it back in your face, they drive you out, and they utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account, when they slander you on my account, when they say things about you on my account. Jesus understood, even for this first group of followers, this crowd that had gathered, that there will be extreme views of what I'm teaching you, that people will take and twist these words and will push them to the extreme. Jesus understood, even back here thousands of years ago, this would happen. He knew that the very things that he was saying would lead to misinterpretation that would spin into all sorts of false beliefs about Christians. Jesus knew this thousands of years ago. And it wouldn't be long before his early followers were actually lied about in the city square. Here are things that were being told of these early followers of Jesus. First, there was a rumor going around that they were cannibals. Because in John chapter 6, when Jesus said, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, that meant that they were eating people's bodies. And so when you and I just participate in communion, what can be told is, well, he said to eat flesh and drink blood, so what are you, some kind of freaks? Like, what are you eating this now? And that was literally spun into that understanding. And there were extreme believers who were literally doing that, who misinterpreted the words of Jesus and then caused all sorts of problems. Secondly, they were considered sexually immoral. Because this idea of celebrating the supper or this meal together, breaking bread together, was called a love feast. And you can imagine all the things that were told about what went on at a love feast. And so that was spread around about Christians. And again, on the extreme, were there people doing that? Absolutely. And yet that continued into the rumor and gossip. They were believed to be dividing families because Jesus taught that when I establish the kingdom, there might be some tension within families. And so the belief was communicated. You know, Jesus is telling people to divorce. You know that, right? You know, Jesus is telling dads to leave their children behind. This was being communicated. And then they were also told they were traitors because they would not honor the emperor and they would not honor Roman gods. They refused to say Caesar is Lord. So they were told, what, you don't love your country? You're not patriotic? Is that your problem? And this would spread around about them. And the same is true for us today, is it not? That Christians are misrepresented. In the media, at schools, in your workplace, Christians are misrepresented. But here's the sad truth. They're often misrepresented with evidence. That's the problem. It's not on the account of Jesus. It's on the account of some hate speech that they have. It's on the account of some rhetoric that they have uttered, whether it's on social media or in person. But there are rumors and things being spread around. There's slander. The views that Christians have leaves room for slander based on our teachings. Based on our teachings of marriage and sexuality and finances and parenting, it leaves the door open for slander, does it not? When misinterpreted. The problem is we get surprised when it happens. We're surprised that people misinterpret the Bible, as if we never misinterpret the Bible. And we're surprised that this happens. But here's the thing, Jesus was never surprised, and he told us to never be surprised. Look back at verse 11 again. Blessed are you when others revile and persecute. Not if, when. It's not blessed are you, just be ready in case it happens. He's saying when this happens. The question for us is, why are we surprised? Like, why are we surprised that the world doesn't agree with the teachings of Jesus? Why are we surprised about that? Why are we surprised that our stances on certain things, marriage, sexuality, finances, why are we surprised the world doesn't agree? And yet, in our getting caught off guard, we think we're being treated unfairly. That's not fair. I should have the same rights in this. Well, the good news is that Jesus gives his early followers a way to handle it. So Jesus is going to tell you, hey, here's how you fight it. Here's how you fight the problems. When there's rumors and gossip being spread around, here's how you defend yourself. And here's verse 12. Rejoice and be glad. What? Yeah, when others slander you. Like when they twist what you say, when they mock you and they throw it back in your face, when they distort the belief of Christianity. When that happens, rejoice and be glad. What we want him to say is when others revile you and persecute you, when they slander you, I want you to set the record straight. You need to get out there and vote. It doesn't say you got to fight fire with fire. He doesn't quote the Beastie Boys and say, you got to fight for your right. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, well, listen, they're all idiots. Let it roll off your back. He doesn't say, you know what you should do? You should get on social media and rant about it. That's what you should do. He also doesn't say, why don't you just give in to what they want? That way they're happy. No, Jesus says, when this happens, not if, when you're slandered, when you're mocked, when you're driven out, rejoice and be glad, which demands the question of the church in 2023. How are we doing with that? Are we a rejoicing, glad people? When it feels like everything we stand for is being pushed to the margins, are we rejoicing, glad people? Or are we angry, anxious, fighting for our rights kinds of people? Jesus says to rejoice and be glad because your reward is great in heaven. He continues, because they persecuted the prophets who went before you. So the good news is that there are people who have experienced the same thing. There are people who have experienced this before. So that's like, okay, cool. Like, how did they handle it? Well, here's what happened to them. James was beheaded. Philip was crucified. Matthew was slain by the sword. Matthias was stoned and then beheaded. Not Bob Marley stoned with rocks, stoned, and then beheaded. Andrew was crucified, left hanging on the cross for 3 days. Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded by Nero in Rome. Jude was crucified. Bartholomew was beaten to death with clubs. Thomas was speared to death. Simon the Zealot was crucified. And John, the one Jesus loved, was exiled on an island and died there a prisoner. Rejoice and be glad, for this also awaits you. That's what Jesus says. When this happens, when they revile and persecute you, and when they slander you, simply because you're a Christian, rejoice and be glad. There's a reward coming in heaven, and you might get there quicker than you think. Let's look at this phrase, for your reward is great in heaven. Now, how we hear this phrase tells us whether or not we're going to make it through the persecution and slander. If your immediate reaction to great is your reward in heaven is, in heaven? That's like layaway. What about now? Like, what about my reward now? How about now? If that's your reaction to it, listen, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. If the reaction is cool, a reward, what are we talking about? Like financial? Is it health and prosperity? What's the reward? Then I just don't think you're going to make it. He gives the reward in the next phrase. Here's the reward. You're not alone. They persecuted the prophets who were before you. You see, what's hard for us, I think particularly in the Anglo-Saxon, the white side of it, is that we're not really ancestral people. Like, we don't hearken back to our ancestors to glean understanding, to carry on some sort of legacy from our family. So this idea that people have gone on before you doesn't do as much for us anymore, because we're enamored as a people with the new and the young. It's why some of you are almost 50 years old and you're on TikTok. That's why. And you should get off of TikTok. Good gracious. Every single one of us. But we like the new and the hip thing. We just sang an ancient hymn. Did it not move you? It moved you. Yeah, praise the Lord. We're enamored with the new, and so the idea, the reward is that you're carrying on a long lineage of people who have gone before you does nothing for us. So then Jesus continues to help us, right? There's no break in his sermon, doesn't pause for intermission at this point. It's just a sermon. He continues. Blessed are you when you're persecuted and reviled and you're slandered because of my name. And he continues, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. So how does he continue his sermon? He begins by saying, you are the salt of the earth. Now in the Greek, this is a plural you. So in the Southern Greek, it would have been all y'all. All y'all are the salt of the earth. There's a crowd gathered to hear him. And again, we twist this scripture so much. We got to understand who the crowd is. Matthew chapter 4, we learn this every single week. This crowd are the marginalized. It's the ones who have been pushed to the edge of society. It's the sick and the hurting and the broken. It's the epileptic and the demon-possessed. These are the ones. And Jesus stands before them and he says, all of y'all are the salt of the earth. Now, they have heard before, right? They have heard before there are certain people who work on behalf of God. And what they were told was, listen, we'll handle it. Why don't you just go out there? We'll take care of the God stuff. We'll be his missionaries. We'll be the ones working for him. Why don't you just move along? And Jesus says, no, y'all are. You. The ones who are poor in spirit, the ones who mourn over their sin, the ones who are meek, they have strength under control. They understand just because they can doesn't mean they should. The ones who are desperate for righteousness, the ones full of mercy, the ones who have been tried by fire and came out pure, and the ones seeking reconciliation. Y'all are the salt of the earth. And again, look at the Beatitudes. It says not by doing anything or saying anything, it's simply by being something. You know, salt doesn't do anything. Salt affects its environment simply by being what it is. Jesus understands by being these kinds of people, there's something coming for you. He knew that what he was asking of these citizens of this new kingdom, this kingdom of heaven, it would lead them to trial and tribulation and trouble and persecution and slander. So I believe if we read this in context, what he's doing is he's giving them a metaphor to help them stay the course. He's saying, I know it's coming, so listen, I need to remind you, you're the salt of the earth. So what does salt do? Well, in those times, and still today, but they didn't have refrigerators, and so salt, first of all, would preserve. You would get meat from a butcher or whatever, and then you would need to put salt on it immediately to help preserve that meat to last longer. Secondly, salt brings out the flavor. All you need for a good steak is salt. That's all you need. But it brings out the flavor of what's already in there. But the downside is that salt disinfects. I grew up on the coast of Florida, and so we went to the beach a lot. And what was amazing is that if you would go to the beach with a cut on your leg or on your arm, and you'd walk into the salt water, it would burn for a moment, and then you'd walk back out, and you're pretty much healed at that point. Like salt has this crazy disinfecting, cleansing kind of work that it does. And so we never paid a copay. We just went to the beach. That's all we did. By the power of the ocean, we were safe. That's what salt does, right? But the immediate response of salt is not that. Salt, with all of its good, with all of its preserving qualities and how it flavors, it's painful on an open wound. It's painful and yet it's cleansing. And so where there's salt and an open wound, there is reaction. And the world will react to the pain before it allows the salt to do the cleansing. I want you to hear that. Before the salt can cleanse, the world will react to the pain and the open wound. And so simply, the orthodox beliefs and practices of Christian faith are like salt to an open wound. And so when we declare things about marriage and sexuality on the open wound of the world, don't you expect a recoil? Don't you expect a kick? You got to expect that. And so Jesus knows it's coming. And so in that moment, in the moment between the pain and the cleansing, what's the church going to do? How do we handle it? How do we handle the pushback and the kickback? What do we do? Will we stay? Will we stay in the midst of the rebelling for the cleansing of the world, for their good, or do we run and hide? Do we stay when it gets hard, knowing the outcome is that light overcomes darkness, or do we run and hide to our own quarters? Will we leave the work unfinished and then leave the world in pain without the cleansing? Or will we stay just to keep pouring more salt on the wound? How do we handle it? Well, Jesus again gives us wisdom here. He says, you are the salt of the earth. The problem is when salt loses its taste, its saltiness, its flavor, the King James says loses its savor, how shall its saltiness be restored? And here's what's crazy, is that salt doesn't lose its flavor. Salt will not become unsalty. That's not a thing, and Jesus knows that. But there's a euphemism being floated around in this day. So all the salt that they had would have been scraped up from the Dead Sea, which was miles and miles south of where they are on the Sea of Galilee. It would be scraped up and filtered, then brought up to Galilee, and they would use it there. The problem is, as it's brought up, it's actually impure. As they dredge it up from the sea, it's impure. So it's got all sorts of compounds in it with vegetable and earthly substances, all sorts of things. And in this mix, salt, though, is the purest of all of them. But when you add water to it, the salt then begins to do what it does, and salt begins to salt the water. And when you filter it out, though, what's left is a white substance that looks a lot like salt. It looks like it. And some would say it even smells like it because of where it came from. The problem is, if you're going to put that substance on your meat, it will rot immediately. If you pour that substance on an open wound, you'll have to lose that arm. There's something about this salt, or what looks like salt. It looks like salt, but it has neither its flavor or its preservative abilities. It looks just like it should. It goes to church, it's got a fish on its car, sings all the right songs, and yet neither preserves or disinfects. It looks the part, and yet it does nothing. And so what would they say about this solution, this powdery substance? They would say, man, that's good for nothing. And they would use it to line walkways and paths on which you would walk. So when Jesus says, if this salt loses its saltiness, when it gets mixed in with the world, when it gets all of those things, and it's not pure, and it might look like salt, but it's not actually salt, it's actually just stones, it's good for nothing. We just throw it out, which is why Jesus continues. It's no longer good for anything, but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. So let me caution us, because here's what we do. We're like, that's exactly right. And we jump to hot button issues, and we think that's right, because if those things get into the church, it's going to be a problem. Homosexuality. If homosexuality gets into the church, that's when the church has a problem. If the prosperity gospel gets into the church, that's when it has a problem. If the church becomes okay with abortion, that's when the church loses its influence. But again, in context, this is not about behavior. This is about character. This is about character. What Jesus is saying is when we adopt the character of the world, we become useless. When we are no longer poor in spirit, we no longer mourn our sin, we're no longer meek and desiring righteousness, or full of mercy, no longer refined by the fire and seeking reconciliation. We are useless. And the truth is, we already know this, we're just afraid to admit it. It's why, in the past, while the evangelicals have lobbied and voted and gotten their man into power, we've never seen a Christian difference in our communities. Just because you got a president or a school board director, whatever, you got a supervisor, you got a boss, just because you got somebody there, but there is no character underneath it, we haven't seen an inch of darkness push back in our communities. It's why we can argue and complain and talk to the manager, but we never see a kingdom impact. The truth is, kingdom culture is useless without kingdom character. So if we want kingdom culture, but we're not willing to be molded with kingdom character, we are salt that has lost its saltiness. We look the part, but we're killing things more than we're saving them. Truth is that many Christians would rather fight culture than form character. We'd rather fight against same-sex marriage while we have rising divorce rates in the church. We fight against sexual promiscuity while we mess around with pornography in the church. We fight against the misappropriation of funds and taxes, and yet we refuse to tithe to the church. We fight for new school standards and protection for our kids while we give them unsupervised access to phones and the internet. We would rather fight culture than form character. How's that going? Have we moved the needle at all for the gospel of Jesus? What it means to be salt is not just to look like it, but to actually be it. I heard this quote a few weeks ago from a guy named Jamin Roller. He says, we want enough of Christ in the culture to make us feel safe in the world, but not enough of Christ in us to make a difference in the world. We want enough of Christ in the culture to make us feel safe in the world. We want the right decisions to be made and people in power so that the world's views aren't thrown in our face all the time. We want enough of that to make our kids feel safe at school, and yet we refuse to do the work of getting enough Christ in us to actually make a difference. You can have whoever you want in power, but until the church has the character of Christ, we're doing nothing. We'd rather feel safe and comfortable in the world than actually be poor in spirit and mourn for our sin. Jesus says it's the poor in spirit, mourning, meek, hungry and thirsty for righteousness, merciful, pure, peacemaking church that is the salt of the earth. That's who it is. Not the political activists, not the ranters and ravers. It's the ones who look like Jesus. And again, it's plural. All y'all are the salt of the earth. Not some of us, not the professionals, not the ones with a title. All of us are the salt of the earth. And he says we are, not we will be, not we used to be, but that we are. Y'all are the salt of the earth. And of the earth is important because salt only makes a difference when it touches what it's changing. If you cut some potatoes up and you fry them up and you put them on your table and then you put a canister of salt next to them, you're just eating fried potatoes. But man, the moment you put that salt on them, they become glorious French fries at that point. The moment the salt touches what it's meant to change, that's when it happens. So sure, we can all be salt. We can be salt in this container of the church, in this container of some weird subculture that we have as a church, and we'll never make a difference because we're not touching what we're meant to change. All of us, y'all are. We are all the salt of the earth. We are. Not we will be when we get it figured out. Not we will be when we get over that addiction. No. Now we are. Now we are. So what do? Well, it's simple. We just live like it. We just live like it. We don't have to fight culture wars if we're living like it. So the truth is, it begins for us personally in our own hearts. You're the salt of the earth. And in your own heart is some world. And that salt has to do some work against the world. Your worldly desires, your worldly appetites, your worldly passions for yourself have got to be met with the salt of the good news. And it's painful, but it's cleansing when it works in your heart. We begin with us. And then secondly, church, we've got to begin in our homes. We've got to begin in our homes. Husbands, you can fight all you want for the kingdom to move in a community, but if you don't love your wife as Christ loves the church, it means nothing. Say all you want, rant all you want, but if you're not loving your wife, it doesn't matter. Because while you feel uncomfortable with same-sex marriages, is your marriage projecting something that's worthwhile? Is your marriage the salt of the earth? Are you loving your wife the way Christ loves the church? Wives, you can rant and rave all you want, but until you respect your husband, it's not going to make a world of difference in our culture. Sure, again, rant and rave, protect your kids all you want to, but your kids need you to love their dad. That's what they need. I don't know that right now in the world there's a stronger witness than a thriving, joyful Christian marriage. You know how weird that is to people? That you actually like the person you're supposed to love? You understand how weird that is? Like that you like being around them, that you are for them, you don't gossip about them, you don't talk about inappropriate things. You understand that? Like, do you understand that you might even sacrifice some sort of promotion in your career because you need to be home with your family? You understand how weird that is? Like, it's not hard. In our world, it's not hard to stand out. But we'd rather rant about something that makes us uncomfortable than actually do the work in our own homes. And parents, let's just keep going while I'm on it. You've got to salt the world out of your kids. The world has made its way into your home. It's there. And again, sure, you can complain all you want about entertainment and about friends and the school system, but the truth is, As the gatekeeper of your home, you let it into your home. And you can rant and rave and go crazy about the sexual promiscuity among teenagers. And then you hand your child a phone with unfiltered access to pornography. And then you say, yeah, but everybody has a phone. What are you, 14? Well, I can't just stop. I can't put it back in the box. No, literally put it back in the box. Again, we can go all we want about the culture, but this is about character. Are you parenting as a citizen of the kingdom? Are you parenting as one who's poor in spirit and mourning? Dad, have you ever apologized to your kid for the way you handled a situation? Do you recognize, mom and dad, the power you have and yet you use it under control? Are you careful with the words that you speak at home about leaders and people? Are you parenting as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven? And students, you are not off the hook. Many of you are past the age where you can keep blaming your parents for your problems. I love you. In the Jewish culture at the age of 13, you were an adult. But you'd rather stay home and play Fortnite than go make a difference in your community. Students, if you name the name of Jesus at your school, you will be reviled. You will be persecuted. You will be called all sorts of names. Rejoice and be glad. And then we can move to our workplaces and our schools. Y'all are the salt of the earth. The salt affects change whatever and wherever it touches. And again, it is so easy. I think the ethic of evangelism is so easy in our culture right now. Here's why I say that. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, Paul says, do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Did you see verse 14? What does it take to shine as lights in the world? Just stop complaining. Look how easy that is. You don't need to memorize the Romans road. Don't need to understand apologetics. Don't need to defend were there dinosaurs on the ark. No one cares. What you need to do is just stop grumbling and complaining. What if you did? What if you were that employee? What if you were the one employee who just said, yes, sir. Yes, sir, I'm going to keep doing this spreadsheet. It's rotting my soul from the inside out, but I will keep doing it. That you don't complain about a coworker, you don't gossip about your boss. Look at that. If you do all things without complaining and arguing, you're going to shine. That's how you make a difference. You don't need to wear a Jesus Christ Coca-Cola t-shirt to work. You just got to do this. And then we can move to our community. But this whole thing is about character. This whole thing is about kingdom character inside the citizens of the kingdom of heaven. So how do we do it? Well, Jesus kind of tells us already, verse 12. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, because that's where they persecute us. The persecuted ones, that's where they are. And then he comes down to verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. He's contrasting these two things. Here's what's hard. The only way to kingdom character, which makes a kingdom difference, is to set our minds on heaven while we live in earth. The reward is not on the earth, so quit looking for it there. You're not going to be respected. You're not going to be admired. You're not going to be the one who will get called to come talk to the students. You just won't be. And that's not prejudice. That's not persecution. That's just the way it is. No one's coming to you for leadership advice. Your reward is not on the earth. Your reward is not our people in power. That's not the reward. Our reward is not certain things not on the TV. That's not the reward. Our reward is not on earth. Our reward is in heaven. How do you get through earth? You get through earth by keeping your eyes set on heaven. That's where it is. It's a lot like those kids playing soccer. How do you get through the game? Because you got to find somebody in the stands cheering you on. That's how. Your reward's not going to be there. It's going to be in what's gathered around you. And the author of Hebrews gives a long list in Hebrews 11 of all these people who have gone on before us. It's Abraham and Isaac and it's Moses. It's a powerful list. But then he gets down into verse 36, and he just calls them others. Others. We don't know who they are. They don't have names. They don't have stories that we know of. They suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. The author of Hebrews gives this long list. Here are those people that Jesus talks about in Matthew 5, those who've been persecuted who are now in heaven. This is who they are. Saying he's given you a list of all of these people. And then in the next chapter, he begins with this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, therefore, because the stands are packed with people who have gone on before, people who have lived it and who have made it through, people who have lived it and have been martyred for it, people who have lived it are cheering us on. Because we have such a great cloud of witnesses, we can lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and we can run with endurance the race that is set before us, our race. Do you understand what we are doing in 2023 is we're just continuing the legacy of the gospel that's been planted thousands of years ago. There's nothing new that we are doing. The things that we are studying, the things that we are celebrating, the way that we are living is just the new iteration. It's just us. It's our turn. It's just our turn. And so while it's our turn, you know who's in heaven? Standing at the gate, looking down, cheering us on? It's Isaiah, and it's Daniel, and it's Malachi, and Amos, and Job. And it's David, and it's Matthew, and Mark, and it's Luke, and it's John. They're up there saying, come on, you can do it. I'm here. I'm here. Look up here. Get your eyes up here. Now, let's go. But it's better than that. Look at verse 2. Looking to Jesus. You want to talk to someone who was slandered and persecuted. Someone who had all sorts of things falsely said about him. Well, we look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy, in rejoicing that was set before him, endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Here's what I'm saying to us this morning, church. The stands are packed, full of people that have come to watch you on this field that we call earth. While our eyes are down, trying to get the referee to make the right call, we're missing the spectacle of those who have gone on before saying, yeah, now it's your turn, let's go. Let's go. Let's go, poor in spirit, mourning, meek, hungering and thirsting, merciful, pure in heart, persecuted. Let's go. So I don't know where you're seeking your reward this morning, but I'm letting you know if it's on earth, you're not going to make it. If your reward is a promotion, if your reward is some sort of credibility on this earth, you're not going to make it. But if your reward is the fact that you are just next in line, we're going to make it, church. And we will be salt that savors and disinfects the earth to which we were called. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes as we wrap up this morning? Seems that the world is getting increasingly more combative with the church. And the fleshly tendency is to fight against that. The problem is we want to fight against it with the ways of the world. But the ways of the world will never bring the way of the kingdom. And you can win all you want, but still never find Jesus there. So I just wonder this morning how many of you would say you actually want the kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven? Would you raise your hands like, I want that. I want the kingdom of heaven to come to earth. That's what I want. Yeah. It's the goal of the church. It's what we want. We're bringing heaven to Ola, heaven to McDonough, heaven to Henry County. Now, I wonder how many of us are doing that through heavenly means. Maybe it's in our own hearts. We've got some work to do. Maybe it's in our homes where we've got some work to do. Maybe it's at our schools, in our workplaces. Maybe we just need to shut our mouths and be salt. Maybe you're here this morning, and it's a miracle you actually set foot in a church today. Because of all the things you've heard about a church, you would never want to actually go to one. My prayer that this morning what you're hearing is the good news of the gospel. That while you may have met some fringe problems, it's not the way of Jesus. And the way of Jesus might hurt you. Like it might burn a little bit when it first touches the open wound, but the way of Jesus is healing. And so the invitation today is to let the way of Jesus, let the gospel finish her work in you. Good news is that while we were filthy and sinners and full of open wounds, that God sent his son Jesus to come and to rescue us. And it feels painful because we think we should be able to do it on our own. And to admit the fact that we can't, that's a problem. But that's the truth. And that Jesus gave his life as a ransom for you, for your own soul. And the things you're running to and clinging to bring you satisfaction, you'll never find in the world. You'll only find in the finished work of Jesus. And so the invitation is to receive that gift, to accept it. That this is how it is. And Jesus is who he says that he is. That you might have new life. The Bible calls it salvation there. So if that's you this morning and you're looking for new life, looking for salvation, it's only found in Jesus. Father, we love you. God, will you forgive me for the times that I have run from being salt because of the pain I was causing or issues? Would you forgive me for the times that I've adopted the world's means to accomplish kingdom purposes? God, would you make us a church that simply is salt? In the world that's dying and decaying, God, we're here to preserve and bring life. In the places where we live, work, and play, Father, help us to do just that in a way that glorifies you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.